We're live. Good evening and happy Monday to everyone. Welcome to State of the Union on the Culture Shifts Network. I'm your host, Kevin Kimble, the founder and CEO of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition, or FSIC. And tonight I have two great guests. Joining us for the first time is Reverend Dr. John H. Vaughn of Ebenezer Baptist Church and Brad Anderson, CEO of Global Risk Managers. And as most of you who've ever watched the show before know, we're going to talk economics until everyone's sick of hearing it and do something to make it better. So tonight, Dr. Vaughn's on the hot seat with Brad as we talk about Keynesian economic policy, everything from the Poor People's Campaign to the Humphrey Hawkins Act of 1978 and everything in between. Brad and the Rev have a long-standing relationship, so I'm going to let Brad come on and do a quick introduction because he'll do a much better job than I would, and then we'll jump into the show. Brad. Oh wait, before you do that, I'll remind everyone this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in DC, we're having our annual policy summit. So if anyone's in town or able to get here, we'd love to have you. We have 3 full days of panels and discussion groups about economic activity. We're going to bring people from around the country who are actually doing work in economic policy. Brad is not there this year, but we're going to talk about some of his stuff, OSIP, and some of the other issues related to contracting, antitrust, health inclusion, et cetera. So I'd be remiss, everyone would be mad at me if I don't say something about that, but we are having the summit and we hope people can join us. Brad, you went dark. Are you still there? Brad went dark, Reverend Vaughn. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
No worries. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and to have this chance to be in conversation with you about what I think is an important topic today. I'm Reverend John Vaughn. I'm the executive pastor here at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I have just started my 7th year. I come from a background of not just working within congregational ministry, but I have also done faith-based organizing. I have led and been engaged in philanthropy. I also worked in the field of theological education. And so really come to this calling and to this position with a broad background of community engagement.
I couldn't hear anybody.
Brad, we can hear you. He can't. No. Okay, please continue.
So really come to this work with a broad experience related to community engagement. And so it is good to be here to really talk about really, I think, the importance of both economic policy and action and the roles that faith communities can play in supporting that work.
Well, I'll give you a couple of tidbits. I don't know if Brad told you. I also am the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's SCLC's DC Bureau and run their think tank, the Southern Christian Leadership Global Policy Initiative. So we are a big platform in terms of political and policy advocacy, and work with several churches on a workforce program in the Carolinas, and we've done some work with churches in a few other states as well. So we are big proponents of bringing faith-based leaders to the fight, and it has been a long-standing tradition. So we just try to ramp it up. So thank you, Brad. We went ahead and started, but glad to have you back. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's strange. I can hear you over my phone. Oops, okay. I think Tracy just hung up.
Okay, all right. So I
can't hear you guys.
Okay, well, we'll continue with the interview, and if we get your technology.
You guys go ahead.
Okay, thanks. All right, so Rev, I have questions, but tell me, what do you think is missing in African American leadership that we are not as engaged as we should be? I mean, from your perspective, you're doing a lot of work across the country. I always say that the people who hate us spend a lot more time and energy and money trying to hurt us than we spend on trying to help ourselves. what's missing in that equation?
So I think that I actually would say that the network of African American leadership is actually strong, and I think in many ways it's probably it's probably less visible, if you will. I think there's been a shift away. I think one of the things that this generation learned was the importance of more of a democratization of movements. And so what you have now are movements that are more webbed and networked than versus, okay, here's the person who is the leader, or here are the three leaders. And so I actually think the leadership is there. I think it is probably less. It has moved to a place where it's less focused on the charismatic leader. But I would say that when I look in communities, and I look in communities throughout this country, I think the web of networks are strong. There's a lot of great organizing and leadership that's happening at local levels. Now, I also think that there is a season now to recalibrate, so that there are some voices that will come forward, and the importance of platforming voices. I mean, I think it's no coincidence. I'm at a congregation now where our senior pastor is a U.S. senator, and I think that's an example of beginning to platform those voices, and the ways that he also shines light on other leaders throughout the country. I think the other thing I'll say is that I do think that oftentimes that what gets the airtime in the public dialogue oftentimes happens at the margins. It's like the far right and the far left, and everybody screams, and the intention is to draw your attention away from different things.
Yeah.
But when you look at, I think Minnesota is actually a really good example. But when you really drill down, actually what you saw in Minnesota was community. This was community that had knit together for years and generations.
Yeah.
And so folks were coming together and saying, no, you're not going to divide us by race. You're not going to divide us by class. Like, these are neighbors. And so I think that is much more prevalent than we oftentimes than gets airtime and that gets the attention. Because right now there's such an the approach, certainly out of federal level, and I would even say out of some state levels, is it's on the attack to erode and to marginalize, and so there's a time where you feel like there's a lot of playing defense, but there's some offense and there's some organizing that's going on. I just don't think it gets as much airtime.
So one of the things we've noticed, and one of the things we fight hard, and one of the things we impress upon the audience is, affluent African Americans and middle class African Americans, and to a certain degree Hispanics and other minorities, don't contribute financially the way the majority population does. So, for instance, one of the Fearless Fund, you're probably familiar with that effort at the Fearless Fund. So that guy Bloom spends his money, incredibly well on trying to retard growth of African Americans. Spent probably about $2.5 million to stop $250,000 worth of scholarships. Or even you see it in the situation where we're talking about government contracting. I know, personally, 2 or 3 larger government contractors who say they got their first contracts through 8A or set-asides, but when it comes to fighting the fight to save set-asides, they are absent from the fight. And we ask them, they say, well, I don't know why I don't do anything about that. So, have you encountered that? Are you able to, you're at the church, so you get tithing, but how does like the SCLC or other groups raise, like Charlie Kirk's group, that the TPSUSA, whatever, raised $250 million in 3 months. Most civil rights groups probably are lucky to have a budget of a couple of $1 million. So the battlefield is definitely unequal, and even though the other side has more money in general, it's still the outsized resources doesn't really make sense from that standpoint.
So I think that it's not a I don't think it's a simple response. I mean, I think there are multiple layers to this. So one of the things that one of the places I worked for about 6 years was a a public foundation called the 21st Century Foundation, and our focus was on Black community change. And one of the when we began to do research around Black donors, what we oftentimes found is that it wasn't that they weren't philanthropic, but they were philanthropic in ways that you didn't see it. And it was oftentimes a lot of family members. There were a lot of networks that they were really supporting. And you'll actually see this play out when you actually drill down, when you look at those that are particularly professional athletes or those that are in the entertainment business. And so there's a level of philanthropy that looks different. It's not just through the traditional donor advised fund or set up a foundation, but there's a lot in terms of supporting local communities. Now, the other thing is that, that particularly Black philanthropy has been very heavily invested in education. So a lot of scholarships, healthcare, like that's really where, because education oftentimes, we value that so much that the importance of, we understand the importance of what education does and what it means. And so you'll see it, you certainly see the giving that's happened in HBCUs across this country. Like that's some of the places that it shows up. Now, that said, I also think that some donors are having to evolve and feeling more comfortable with their dollars, because I do think that when you start to invest in efforts like social change efforts or community revival, those types of efforts that are more justice oriented, it's taking some steps, and it's taking some level of vulnerability for folks and who are really more newer into their wealth. We don't have as much inherited wealth in terms of the wealth transfer that happens within this country. I mean, there's data. Boston College had done a research a number of years ago around the wealth transfer, and when you look at the difference between wealth transfer and Black and white communities, it is sizable. And so some of this is a dollars issue. But as Black folk become more comfortable with their wealth and their resources, I think you will begin to see more investment in social change and economic justice in some of this organizing. But I think part of it is folks are getting more and more used to and feeling and starting to get braver in terms of making that kind of investment.
I think that there's a lot to what you just said, and none of these are easy answers because there's a lot of history. But I was a former congressional staffer and I was a former lobbyist, right? So I spent a lot of time, on changing rules and changing laws. And one thing that becomes real obvious is that we don't invest in change. So the rules get changed, like the fight for the Civil Rights Act, or even the Humphrey Hawkins, those things that we were talking about. The amount of effort, of money that needs to go into it, or even saving the 8A or changing the government contracting platform requires money, right? I mean, the $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million worth of, and the Black chambers don't do it. None of those people are engaged. So how do we, when we're under this assault, if we can't convince each other, to the people who do have resources, to engage in the fight, how do we win the fight, or how do we stay in the fight?
So I think that one of the important elements that's going to play a critical role in change is investing in local communities. So it's going to take grassroots organizing. It's going to be supporting, like I mentioned earlier, those webs of networks of leaders, of beginning to both invest at that very grassroots level in these leaders who are beginning to emerge. It's continuing to seed a lot of that work. I think you have a generation now that is more newly, is beginning to see both that has been activated, but also beginning to understand kind of new ways of organizing. new ways of organizing, the way to include digital space, and understanding the importance, the role that times charismatic leadership plays. So I think we'll begin to see more and more of that. And once again, I think you're seeing it electorally in terms of the folks that are now running for office. I mean, you look at somebody like AOC up in the Bronx. I mean, who saw that one coming?
Right.
But once again, it's about, but it's a sign that you're seeing a new level of activism of folks that are willing to step up. And I think the dollars will begin to follow, I think, in some of those cases. But I think what you speak to is also how do we begin to expand our philanthropic imagination as people of color, I think, in this country.
And I don't call it philanthropic, like economic empowerment or inclusion is not philanthropic. If you're a person who wants to get contracts, that's not, I mean, we're not talking about charity here. We're talking about investment in your future. And how do we get people to think about that differently? Because it's like, if New Jersey, we'll talk about Brad, you talked about like New Jersey, government contracts go 0.14% of government contracts go to Black people. So that's not, giving money to change those rules or those results. It's not philanthropic for the business. I mean, how do we change that conversation?
So I think part of it's investing in the infrastructure to make those changes, the people who can be at those tables. I think we have to continue to do more education around this. I think within both in our local communities and through congregations like ours and through nonprofits and through the civic organizations. So I think it's education. I think it's going to take advocacy. It's going to take, and when I talk about philanthropy, I'm also talking about investing in those organizations that will then get you at the table or get at the table, who will do that work that needs to happen. But I think the infrastructure is important. Infrastructure, it's oftentimes ignored, but it takes a lot. It takes investment to get to to build the kind of power that's needed to be able to shift policy, to be able to get people in the office. I mean, when you look at the story of Maynard Jackson here is getting Maynard Jackson elected was the first step. And then once Maynard Jackson was elected, then we began to see some of the changes happen. But its roots were in organizing, and it was in coalition building, and it was in building the power to be able to get him elected. So it's electoral politics, but it's also other kinds of organizing that can pressure private industry and can shape the narrative from public will.
I think that that analogy is actually really good, because Maynard, it actually ties all of this together. Right? So the work went in to get Maynard elected, and he actually gave businesses money to Black businesses. He did, and then when the white people started suing again, when the suits started coming to roll back that, the Black businesses never engaged in that fight. Like Brad and I talk about this often, that the 8A program's under tremendous attack. There's all the, they got rid of the MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency. No minority business groups fought that fight. They didn't file any lawsuits. They did not try to engage in the only right we have in America is Article 1 of the Constitution, which says you have the right to petition the government for redress of your grievances. And if we aren't doing that, then the system doesn't work if we don't engage in that. But so I think I love that Maynard Jackson is one of my favorite heroes. I spent a lot of time researching him. I think what he did not shy away from. He and Marion Barry to a large degree, and the guy from Detroit, the first mayor, they all really did a good job with that. But we haven't, we as citizens haven't done our part, which is what we talk about at Physical a lot. And what you guys are doing is very impressive, and I'm glad to know this. What do you think you know, one of the fights we're trying to, and I really want your opinion on this. One of the things we've been pushing on is Trump is doing a lot of disruptive stuff, right? But for Black Americans, particularly for all Americans, and the numbers are horrible across the board. America is not working, so a lot of like getting rid of the 8A program isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world for Black contractors because we weren't getting any of the contracts anyway, right? What do you see as the who's developing policy? I mean, you work with Brad, so he's got a policy, but why aren't people developing more policies to have solutions to give to our legislators? Because our elected officials are just vessels for our work, right? So how do we get more people to engage in that part of the process?
No, it's a good question. I think there still is a level of shell shock among many people. I think there still is. There still are people who are deer in headlights. You just can't believe that you get rid of the Department of Education, or you get rid of USAID, or you they just
tear
got
down
rid of
the
it.
White House.
Yeah, it's like you just got rid of it. And so I think there's a way in which there's still some shell shockness for people, and I think there are people that are deer in headlights, and I think there are those that are organizing on the legal side, and they're organizing on the policy side. I also think that that ultimately, amidst the carnage of all that is happening, one of the opportunities may be to build some new things.
Yeah.
The challenge of what was that a lot of the systems were built around whiteness. And so there was more, you had to fight accommodations. They had to accommodate your entrance. They had to, they jerry-rigged it in order for you to be a part of it. And maybe what we need are some new things.
Yeah.
And new things that are not built and grounded in white supremacy or whiteness, but really built, surrounded by all of us.
Right.
That really Black concerns, Latino concerns, Asian concerns, Native American, that maybe there's an opportunity to do something new in a way that is more about us,
right,
than necessary systems that were built that actually weren't designed to serve us in the first place.
Right.
So, I think that could become, the opportunity for us, I think, in this season.
Yeah, I think we're big proponents of imagining what we want versus trying to say what wasn't working. So I think that's great. Can I ask you, I don't know if you've done the research on this. I think Brad mentioned that your church has a big project on returning citizens. We have a big returning citizens project. Our economist has done some work on what it costs Black people for the high amount of imprisonment that we suffer through. But what we haven't done yet, what research we're looking at doing, is how much money America spends holding us back. If left to our own devices, Black people, we had 700, 800 cities we created in America over time that were destroyed, et cetera. And the amount of money they spend on over policing and lawsuits, like I said, the guy spent $2.5 million to stop 250,000. Have you guys thought about that, or do you talk about that, or have you looked at what, because I know for a fact that it can't be that we aren't able or deserving. There's a foot on our neck and on our throat and on our backs and everything. So have you guys looked at that, or how did that factor?
Yeah, no, there is definitely, and we talk about that in the coalition that we helped seed is called the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. And we have said from the beginning that there's not just a moral argument, but there's an economic argument. And if we were to shift the money that we are spending to incarcerate people to actually look at housing and training and mental health, and it's the same dollars.
Yeah.
We're redirected in that way. I think we think that could really make a big difference. I think part of the challenge is we have to find we have to find some ways to overcome the fear. The reality is that racism is it's baked into society.
Yeah, right.
And so it's, there's this automatic fear, that is there is the default. Like fear is the default. And
Right.
so, yeah, there's a housing program, but the housing program is to build some more, prisons,
Right.
and then we'll move people over there. And there is also a
Yeah,
sense
if you let
as
me.
a,
Are you back?
as a
Brad, can you hear us? Brad?
Yeah,
You can hear us now?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Welcome to the show.
Well, there's also, and I think there's also this there's also a way in which the carceral state is not a rehab state. Like it is about
Punishment.
There's a judgment that's made about you if you are incarcerated, and so therefore then you are treated as less than, and you become a commodity. And if you're treated as less than, then we can treat you any way that we want because the judgment is already there. And so part of what you are really fighting is, and why I think faith communities are critical, is that to be able to address this is a human issue. These are human problems. We've been in coalition with a number of families who have loved ones that are incarcerated, and they talk about, boy, when your loved one is incarcerated, the family is incarcerated. Like it affects everybody. And when you think about a state like Georgia, where 1 in 4 people are touched by the criminal legal system, I mean, it just blows your mind. So what does that mean in terms of the ways that 1 in 4 people are treated or how they are seen?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's like we believe in a God of second chances. We believe that everybody, it needs to be treated with integrity and seeing their humanity. And look, there are going to be folks that need resources to be able to, what it's going to take to get their lives together, or what it's going to take to, but there is this assumption of wrong versus the assumption of possibility. And that's where we stand, in the work that we do.
Brad, you can hear us?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. So Brad, I mean, you were kind enough to wrangle the Reverend into this conversation. I appreciate it. We've talked about OSIP. We've talked about, we've gone through a lot of your ideas, but talk a little bit about what you were, how you envision OSIP savings being utilized to help formerly incarcerated and others get into business.
So I don't think that I quite got. Was that a question for me?
No,
or was
no,
that
it was for Brad. It was a question for Brad.
Okay.
So, Dr. Vaughn and I talked a little bit before we came on about policy, and you guys have talked about it, aggressive policy to address the lack of participation by minority contractors and minority businesses across the board. And Dr. Vaughn, one of the programs that I worked on with Kevin for about 30 years is called owner-controlled insurance. And that is a program that's an insurance program that actually insures large infrastructure projects. And we take that insurance and it levels the playing field for small contractors, but it can also save as much as 3% of the construction budget. And we use that 3% to fund training, education, and workforce development. One of the things that we've envisioned is using that training and workforce development to put formerly incarcerated folks to work. And you guys just spoke about it, the recidivism and the the burden that incarceration is to our community. So, but one of the things, Kevin, that I wanted to focus on with Reverend Vaughn is the history that Ebenezer Baptist Church has in advocating for social and economic justice. And Dr. Vaughn, if you would just share a little bit about the history of Martin Luther King Jr.'s grandfather and the legacy that has continued through the leadership of Ebenezer in advocating for economic and social justice.
So we oftentimes will say that and remind people that Dr. King did not emerge from a vacuum. Like, he came out of a context, and that context is Ebenezer Baptist Church. Like, that played an important role in shaping who he was. But that context was nurtured and created by his father, by his maternal great grandfather.
Calm down for a second. We get a lot of feedback.
So it was created by his father, Daddy King, and his mother, Alberta Christine King. You know, it was created by his maternal grandfather, the Reverend A.D. Williams, who was advocating for Black businesses back, 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. And
56 years before, 50 or 60 years before King was born.
Way before he's even born. And so you've got, it's about probably 70 or 80, so you've got in this history, of both advocacy, whether it's also around voting. Remember, the founding of the first Black high school, in Atlanta really came out of the senior pastors of Ebenezer. I think the engagement around voting rights, both of those, Daddy King, A.D. Williams, and so it's really been in the DNA of this congregation. So in many ways shaped Dr. King Jr. And we have that, we have folks who were organizers at the LCLC, who were union organizers, who were SNCC students. We have members of the Spelman and Morehouse classes that have been celebrated for their activism. I mean, it's in the DNA of who we are, who we have been and who we are. And in many ways it fuels, both, a Pastor Warnock, who not only is willing, who runs for a Senate seat, who looks at the political power, but also, there's been organizing by Pastor Warnock and others around potential Medicaid cuts at the federal level. There was one in his first year, bringing people who had evacuated from New Orleans, back to New Orleans to vote, right after Hurricane Katrina. So, these things are natural for Ebenezer. And in our purpose statement, we talk about individual growth and social transformation. So it's like, to be a Christian for us involves both what one does in terms of one's own personal journey, but it is connected to one's external journey and a care for the interconnectedness of humanity.
Brad?
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Vaughn.
I'm going to ask you both a question, and then Brad, you have a question? Brad?
Well, I was going to ask Dr. Vaughn how he sees the difference between what
We can't hear you, Brad. Can you hear him, Dr. Vaughn?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was asking Reverend Vaughn to share the differences between those battles in the 60s and earlier that the Ebenezer Baptist Church led and the battles that we're facing today.
So I think there are definitely similarities, and I think for us as a congregation, we've seen this movie before. This is not new, and it's sad and it's disappointing, and you wish it were not the case, but we've seen this movie before, and so we are, and so it's not as um it's not as what is shattering or debilitating for us. So there has been when we think about what our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, our great parents have gone through in this country, they've seen things that are similar to some of what we're experiencing. I do think that one difference is there at least was a pretense of civility in it. There was a pretense of, well, we're trying to do kind of the right thing, or that there was at least a pretense of that. There's no pretense right now. I mean, it's just straight up in your face. I don't care for you, and when you see proclamations of, look, I'm going to cut the funding in 4 Democratic states so that they can't get federal money for healthcare. Like that's not pretense. That's outright, aggressive, using policy and out of retribution. And so, it doesn't mean this stuff did not exist beforehand. It may not have been as overt. There may have been more covert ways in which things were done. I mean, it's been interesting to read, and I would encourage you all to read Jean Theo Harris's book, King of the North, which really talks about Martin Luther King Jr.'s work outside of the South. And so she writes about Dr. King's travels from LA all the way to Chicago to Boston and everywhere in between. And how oftentimes that is not, we don't talk about that as much. But how much people were asking him to be present. But look, you had Richard Daley, who was um, who was doing some similar things out of Chicago. Whether when police kill a young person, or flying to DC to change the enforcement of policy that was meant to level the playing field, and he would say no. He would go to DC and talk to Lyndon Johnson to be able to overturn that. So I think so these aren't new things. I think there's a new iteration of it, and I think there's less pretense. There's less even pretense of civility.
So I will say I will say that I do think you're right about this. Is not the things they're doing now are not necessarily worse than what they were doing, but I kind of like to avoid going backwards. I mean, there's a reason why people were willing to die to change those rules, right? I mean, it's not something. I think people are too carelessly or callously, like, or nonchalantly thinking about this. Like, yeah, we've been through this before. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a slave again. I mean, I prefer that. So I'm not sure that I think people should be very afraid. I don't think this is the time to. If ever there was a time to have your hair on fire in my lifetime, now is the time to have your hair on fire.
Well, I think that it's, yeah. So and I want to be clear to not say, we've seen this before as a statement of passivity. I think it is a statement of, all right, we're not going to let this rattle us. We're not going to let this, shake us into a place, paralyze us in terms of action. Like, we know how to strategize, we know how to organize, we know what to do, we can recognize some of this. And one of the things that's very clear about the ways that you fight authoritarianism is through community. It's relationship, it's organizing, and it's saying, no, you will not divide us. And we will fight together. So I think that the recognition is more of a statement of we know what to do with this. We're not powerless. We're not gonna fold up into a ball. We're not going to be paralyzed by this.
Brad?
Yeah, one more question for Dr. Vaughn.
Brad, your volume's off. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can.
Okay. How can the Financial Services Innovation Coalition work with Ebenezer? And I know that you mentioned one thing earlier tonight about the faith-rooted ATL. What are some programs that we can work on together? I know there's the multicultural initiative to end mass incarceration. What are some of the other programs that FSIC can work together with Ebenezer to advance policy to support economic justice?
Well, I think it operates on two levels in terms of ways to be helpful for both an Ebenezer but any faith community. I think one is, how do we continue to build both the financial literacy and the tools and that folks really begin to understand dollars. We've worked before with the D.Free program, so some very basic, financial work. So I think the internal is important, but at the same time, the external is important. So it's consistent with our purpose in individual growth, social transformation. So we've got to continue to do the work on the inside, but also begin to look at, so what are some of the tools or the levers that will make a difference around economic equity? So some of that could be around organizing and advocacy around some of those tools. It could be supporting a platform, that can make a difference around this type of investment and opportunity for Black businesses and for Black entrepreneurs. I think that the other thing to also consider is, are there some programs we want to model? Are there some new efforts that we want to model out there? I'm struck when here in Georgia, I feel that one of the opportunities is, are there ways that we might advocate and leverage state, county, local dollars to create some new tools that will actually seed and grow businesses, that will assist businesses, that will assist Black leaders and people of color and all people, quite frankly, to be able to grow and to develop businesses, but also develop businesses through a lens of social responsibility. Because I think that last part is important, that it's not just for the sake of of both the financial gain for the business, but also to what degree is the business itself being a good corporate citizen and being a good community citizen. And so making sure that we sow in those values and those commitments from the start.
Well, Brad set you up because I've got, so since we've talked, I've gotten 4 things down we can work on. One was policy for returning citizens so they can actually get jobs. So we got to get, like, a felon can't work on the power grid, right? A felon can't get a Series 7 broker's license. A felon can't. So I think we should have a bill that we've worked through both Congress and at the state levels, trying to change those rules so people actually can get jobs that matter. Like we had the utility lineman program, and there was a kid who had a felony vehicular manslaughter trial. He was 3 years in after his sentencing, and he couldn't get a job because of that thing. So I think if your organization would support, we would love to work on that as a policy initiative.
Well, I will add, one of the things that we've been supporting here in Georgia is being pushed by the Georgia Justice Project is the Clean Slate Initiative, which is automatic record restriction, so that you don't have to go through all these steps, even around arrest record, but also, expanding what could be sealed, after, conviction and you've done your time, and, so that things that can at least allow people opportunities to get good paying jobs.
There's a Republican Congresswoman in DC who's trying to make it so that the DC government know that people with felony convictions can't work for the DC government. So we're going to do a letter. We may ask you guys to sign on to that letter with us as we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is you talk about have you guys looked at opportunity zones? The governor has to redraw the Georgia opportunity zones. I believe where you guys sit is currently in a zone, but I don't know if you've worked with the governor to make sure you stay a zone, or if you want to expand a zone, or you have other locations that could be a zone. And have you thought about creating an opportunity zone through Ebenezer, having Ebenezer as its own opportunity zone?
No, I think it's a really interesting idea, and would love to explore that.
The third thing, I'm going to switch, then tied to that is CDFI. So I don't know, you're talking about helping small businesses. So I don't know if you have a credit union. I don't know if you have a credit union at your church or not, but if you're a CDFI, because I know you're in an enterprise zone as well in that area. So you're eligible for CDFI and new market tax credits if you can find a willing partner, if you haven't already done it. So that's one.
So we have been working with our partner, St. Luke's Episcopal Church, in a partnership with the Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which has now just come into the area. Mm-hmm. And so we've been encouraging members, to both get credit union accounts and beginning also to talk with them about both, some of the financial education, but also what lending could begin to look like and what different programs could happen.
Yeah. Well, we should talk more about the CDFI thing. I think would be a really good place for you. The last one, you talked about getting federal, state and local and federal money. The block grants. So the block grants go to the states, and minority communities are notoriously neglected when it comes to getting a fair allocation of block grant money. So whatever your lobbying arms are, your advocacy arms, you should be working to make sure, like all the COVID money, I don't know how much money you guys got at COVID, or if you got money to do COVID outreach or et cetera, but those are places where, education, there's a lot of money out there that just doesn't make its way back, and federal grants, et cetera. I know the HHS just did a big grant, like it was $30 million worth of grants for religious-based outreach, even in the Trump administration. So if that's something you guys are working on, that we'd like to work with you on that, because you'd be a good example of, if you don't get the grants, you're a good example of what's wrong with the system.
I agree.
Brad?
Well, I just really appreciate Dr. Vaughn taking the time to be with us tonight and share his perspectives and make things better for our businesses and communities.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Vaughn, if you want to close us out, we're not big on formalities here. We didn't do an intro prayer, but if you want to do a prayer for us as we go out, you can.
I'll be glad to do that. I was just both a word of thanks for the invitation to be here, and I think the real importance of public and private partnerships through the work that we do. And so I think both conversations like this and opportunities to build those partnerships really do make a difference. And how fitting to see the picture of the Reverend Jesse Jackson as one who really, for faith communities, in his next stage post, coming out of after Dr. King's death and push, and really leaning into the economic justice issues, the economic justice opportunities, and certainly grateful for his legacy and for, how much he has really influenced so many in the next generation, and so grateful for that. So with that, I'll be glad to just close us out in a word of prayer here.
Thank you.
God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for this commitment to both self-determination into collective action. And so help us to be open to your spirit, a spirit that is in our midst, a spirit that grounds us and guides us. We're especially grateful for the ancestors, for the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and so many names that we know and don't know that have given of their very lives to make it possible for us to even be here this day. Help us to be emboldened in action to build the future where all are healed and loved and cared for. We pray this evening in the name of Jesus, the one whom I call Savior and friend. Amen.
Well, thank you both for that. That was very uplifting, and we'll be in touch. Like I said, I'd love to do some things here I think we should do, and having your voice added to the fight is, more than we could ask for.
Thank you very much for having me.
Brad?
Thank you both. Thank you for the opportunity. This has been a historic opportunity as part of the Black History Month.
Yeah, absolutely. Good way to close it out. Thank you, guys. Good night.
Good. Oh, good. Good. All right.